Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian White, Chair of the Governance and Audit Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting this morning. It's a multi-location meeting. It will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. If the live streaming fails, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website at the end of the meeting. I'd like to remind you all that translation facilities are available, and for those attending remotely, to choose your language of choice. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those attending remotely, please use the raise hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. And committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting, please put a message in the chat function and then let us know when you get back. I expect everyone in the meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to one another. That applies to members, officers, and anyone in the public gallery. When any debate is opened up to members, I will ask committee members to speak and put their questions first, followed by non-committee members. Whilst we don't wish to stifle debate, members are reminded that any questions should be focused on the subject matter and to avoid repetition. If I feel that the length of individual speeches is negatively impacting on the overall time for discussion and becoming unmanageable, I will defer to the committee's rules of procedure, which limits the length of speeches to 5 minutes. And can I just add, I think that will be particularly important this morning as we've got quite an extensive agenda to get through. Before we move on to the agenda, Sally, can I just spring this on you? Can you perhaps just explain to everyone the technical issues that we're having?
Yeah, so as there's some technical issues with the system, everyone in the chamber will be required to wear their headsets in order to hear those speaking on Zoom. There should be no impact to those on Zoom. It should be the same experience as usual.
Okay, thank you, Sally. So now moving on to the agenda, item number 1 is apologies for absence. Sally, do we have any?
Yeah, apologies have been received from Councillor Gareth Jones, Councillor Michael Smith, and also Amanda Hughes, Strategic Director for Finance and Resources.
Thank you. Item 2 is the declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest to declare and the nature of those, please? Nigel, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Borrowdale. It's essentially to identify that I'm a member of the Denbighshire Governance and Audit Committee in a personal capacity, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. And no other interest? No. So item number 3, I'm not aware of any urgent matters. No. So now we can move quickly on to item 4, which is the minutes, which have been shared with everyone. They're included in the agenda for accuracy only, and we're not considering them for debate. So can I please ask if there is a proposer in support of these minutes? Thank you, Phil. And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Stephen. And finally, a show of hands, those in support. I think that's, yeah. I think that's everyone, is it? Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5, which is the review of the Governance and Audit Committee Forward Work Programme. Does anyone have any points to make, any questions to raise? Oh, Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the work programme with one eye on the timing of the budget and the key decisions that the council's making in the spring. And in the February cycle, there is no financial report that would inform GAC of where the council is at in relation to that. I'm particularly mindful of the key decisions that need to be made in order to ensure that the council does not inadvertently step into the Section 114 scenario that we've debated. And I would personally prefer to see some measure of report in that February cycle, given the timing of the debate and discussion with council around budget.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Gareth? I think Gareth's going to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. This was something that we discussed with Amanda and at the pre-meet. I think what was agreed, and the chair will correct me if I'm wrong on this, was that we wouldn't include it as a standing item on every meeting, but that we would instead be bringing an update for members following discussion with Ian, Chair, and the Section 151 officer Amanda around the relevance of information to report at that meeting. So I would certainly anticipate, Nigel, just to reassure you that there would be something coming in February along those lines. I think what was I think Amanda's concern was putting something down and creating an expectation that an update would be coming to every meeting when there might not be something relevant to update on. So you could do it either way. I guess you could put it down there and then just not bring something following the discussion with the chair. I think it's either way. But the short answer is I would anticipate that we would be bringing a report given the timing of the budget and that committee meeting.
Thank you, Gareth. And I think, Nigel, I can reassure you that during the pre-meeting briefing, I was assured that there would be an item on the agenda in February. We did have this minor administrative debate on whether we would include in every meeting and then just exclude only the final agenda that was issued. But yes, I'm assured there will be an update there in February, and now it will be minuted as well, so it will happen. You okay with that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had a second point on the work programme, if I could.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to just ensure in governance terms that we all know which foot we're standing on in relation to the receipt of regulatory reports. So on the work programme, there are two effective items there. One is the receipt of the regulatory report. And for example, that look at May 25. And then elsewhere on the agenda is an update in relation to progress being made on regulatory reports. So that the issue I have is that if the GAC is required to consider external regulatory reports, my expectation is that all external regulatory reports are reported to GAC as a first item. The second element about consider progress being made on external regulatory reports is once the council has agreed its action plan in relation to recommendations, and then that gets reported back into GAC subsequently. So, which I understand, and I think, and I believe we as a council have adopted that of management of external regulatory reports. If that is the case, then my expectation is that all external regulatory reports need to come into GAC. And in that regard, I believe that Audit Wales reports fall under that definition. And my concern is that, and it's something we'll probably come on to on a later agenda item, but I'm not necessarily convinced we're in sync as to what comes in and where yet on that process, Chair. So I just flag it as I can see on the work programme, there's a coat hook upon which to hang things. I'm not certain that all the coats are being hung on those hooks yet, Chair. Can come back to that later in the agenda as necessary.
Okay, Nigel, thank you for that. I had when I was going through all the papers, I must say I had a similar sort of worry to yourself, because we were given access to 2 recently issued reports, but I reconciled that by the fact that they were being presented to us in order that we could see as a GAC, we could see the action plans. And if we so wished, we could read the reports. But we have minuted from at least 2 meetings ago that external reports would in the first instance be presented to and noted by the relevant scrutiny committees. And the GAC responsibility was to monitor and be satisfied that appropriate action was being taken to close the items that were required by those external reports to be acted upon. So it did, I must admit, confuse me a little bit that there were the 2 items in the pack for today as well. But as I say, I reconciled that with my understanding that we as a GAC require to be aware of all the action plans and the progress against those actions. But as you say, we may come back to it later in the agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for the delay then. I can't seem to find a hand button. My screen seems to have changed. Lovely update that you get this every now and again. Can I just go back? I know what you said about the minutes out of the debate, but one thing that's been slightly troubling me is that we do get a lot of reports coming in with some strong recommendations, whether it be social services or ERF or all sorts of things which aren't on internal audit. And they're programmes of, how can we say, recommendations to uplift the service. Can I ask through you, Chair, to our internal audit, do they have a monitoring system for them? Because we're obviously not part of their audit remit at the time. And how do we consider them, or do we amalgamate them in with our normal work? Because these are obviously recommendations that have been flagged up by other bodies. So I know it's slightly off kilter from what we normally do, but there are some strong recommendations for different reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. But I'm not quite sure which reports you're actually referring to, because I understood that we were receiving action plans with regard to all external reports that were issued to council.
Yeah, no, you're right there, Chair. Yes, I believe you're correct there, Chair. But where do we see the updates for those within the internal audit updates that we get every quarter? So obviously we've got internal updates. We've got audits.
Yes.
We've got audits that we're either going to, second follow on, first follow on, second satisfactory or not. But then we've got other recommendations that come through slightly different reports, which we've looked at. where do those recommendations go? How do we keep a track of those? Or how do audit keep a track of those and further implement them?
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Wood. All the external audit reports, recommendations we have in a spreadsheet, and myself and the corporate improvement development team look through them on a 6-monthly basis to make sure that the actions are addressed in any external report.
That's right. That's heartening to know, sorry. But what I was trying to get at, and I'm probably not doing it very well, is should the Governance and Audit Committee see a copy of these every 6 months or 3 months to see on the progress? Because that's what we do. We
All external reports are reported on a 6-monthly basis to the GAC.
Yes, but the recommendations themselves?
Pardon?
But the recommendations themselves?
Yes, all the recommendations, yes, all the recommendations are input into the action plan, and then they go to the relevant scrutiny committee for actions, and then they come through to us as GAC to monitor the implementation of the mitigating actions to those recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much, Shirley. Thank you.
I think Councillor Andrew, such a report is actually included in the pack for today's meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Which I think is why we've had this minor confusion as to why there were 2 items on external reports on the agenda this morning, and that in fact is because we've received 2 recent reports and the action plans are being shared with us. So, but really before work has very much started, because they're recent reports, we're actually seeing the action plans. Okay, can I ask, are there any further? Oh, Gareth?
Yeah, just a very minor one. I think we did discuss it the other day. The Treasury Management Q3 update should say February 25. It says February 2024 on the forward work programme.
Oh yeah, just a slight small date. That's, yeah. Okay. No other comments? Okay, can I seek a proposer in support of the forward work programme? Thank you, David. And seconder, please. Thank you, Phil. And finally, a show of hands in support of the programme. It's unanimous. Yep. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So now we can move on to item 6, which is the internal audit performance for the first 6 months of the year. I think, are you taking this one, Sinead?
Okay, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much, members. In accordance with the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards and the terms of reference of the Governance and Audit Committee, the report analyses the internal audit services performance for the period April to end of September 2024 and is supported by appendices A to E. The schedule of performance indicators is attached to Appendix A, which shows that as at the end of September, including those audits at draft stage, we have achieved 58% of the annual plan, with 88% of audits having been completed within the planned time. The schedule showing the planned work performed for the first 6 months is attached as Appendix B. This also summarises the audit opinions and number of recommendations. 3 completed reviews were carried over from 2023-24 and a further 17 audits have also been completed. The houses in multiple occupation provided a limited assurance, and the Head of Regulatory Services and the Principal Environmental Health Officer are both here today to answer any questions you may have. The schedule of follow-up audits attached Appendix C, 3 follow-ups have been completed in the period Ysgol Nantygroes data protection and the second follow-up on procurement governance. The service has undertaken 1 special investigation outlined in Appendix D and 3 final account reviews performed as in Appendix E. And please note the typo on page 25, the final account figure included in the last column should be the contract sum value. Taking you back to the recommendation on page 14, members are asked to consider and provide comment on assurance provided to the Governance and Audit Committee regarding the progress and performance of the service first half of the year. Thank you, Diolch. Happy to take any questions.
Does anyone have any questions or points to raise? Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. It's in relation to the use of temporary accommodation. I think you said you had the Principal Environmental Health Officer in attendance, Sinead, if I'm not mistaken. My question on this for the officer was to establish what approach and whether there's any current work being done in collaboration either with other councils across a wider geographical area or nationally in relation to the provision of temporary accommodation that makes it either easier or more challenging for us to deliver in relation to this particular matter. I'd value an update from the officers on what's actually happening in the wider sense on this area, please, Chair.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you for that question. This report isn't about temporary accommodation. It's about the licensing of houses in multiple occupation. So it's not temporary accommodation, something different that housing services deal with. In respect of houses of multiple occupation, there isn't any current work that's going on collaboratively with other councils that I'm aware of. I don't know if Hugh's shaking his head. So the answer to that is no, there isn't anything at the moment. I mean, we do, I'm in constant contact with my opposite half in certainly Denbighshire Council. So whenever there is an opportunity to help each other out or collaborate, then we would take that, and there are areas that we do that, but this isn't an area where that's happening.
Chair, can I come back on that?
Can I just add that the head of strategic housing was in attendance in the July committee to answer questions about the temporary accommodation report. Thank you.
Yes, Nigel?
Yeah, Chair, can I come back on the licensing, and thank the officers for clarifying. On the licensing, is there ever an attempt to resource licensing in terms of shared staff approach in order to pick up properties in licensing sense that might be out with the geographical area of Conwy, for example?
The answer again is no. Sometimes, again, we look at kind of collaboration where we can, and I understand the point you're making, especially in sort of boundary geographical areas. But these are quite small teams. It's the same number of people. It's the same number of properties. It's the same pressures. And I know that neighbouring authorities have similar pressures. But if there was an opportunity, we'd certainly would have taken it. And as I said, we constantly keep these things under consideration anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Does anyone else have any questions to raise? No? Okay. So we have been asked to consider and provide comment on the assurance provided to ourselves regarding internal audit. So can I ask for a proposer, please, with regard to noting Shauna's report? Thank you, Councillor Stephen.
Sorry,
Okay.
as to whether you're satisfied with the level of assurance given in terms of the proposals.
Sorry, I'm not quite, I thought that's what I had asked the proposer.
Sorry, just
to-
to clarify.
Yeah. And thank you, David, for seconding. And finally, a show of hands, please, in support. 1, 2, 3. I think it's unanimous again, Sally. Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess you gentlemen can leave if you wish, rather than staying for the next 3 hours or longer. Okay. So now we can move on to agenda item 7A, which is financial oversight and governance, which is being led by Gareth. Over to you, Gareth. Thank you.
Diolch, Bawd pawb. So this report, along with Appendix 1 that accompanies it, outlines the key aspects of the financial management and stewardship arrangements that are in place and are integral to the Council's overall governance framework. The report brings together various elements into a single comprehensive position, enabling the Governance and Audit Committee to evaluate the adequacy and operational effectiveness of the various arrangements. Internal audit work has been conducted to assess the adequacy of these arrangements, and it's the Governance and Audit Committee's role to ensure that they're happy that the adequacy of the financial control arrangements and understand also the financial risks to the Council without duplicating the work of the various other committees across the Council. So the report recommends noting the existing financial management and stewardship arrangements, take assurance from previous internal audit work on compliance with the SIPFA Financial Management Code in particular, and also to acknowledge the ongoing efforts that are in place to address in-year financial pressures and the budget strategy for 25-26 with the business planning framework and the like. The Council has implemented a wide range of financial management and stewardship arrangements to safeguard public money and to use public funds efficiently and effectively. Appendix 1 details those arrangements and also the current financial challenges faced by the Council, along with a range of measures that are in place to manage those challenges. Just briefly, in September, the Cabinet approved the Resilience Action Plan to address the financial challenges, align the medium-term financial strategy with the Council's vision, and identify transformation areas to improve financial resilience. Just finally, I'm mindful that there is a lot of detail within Appendix 1, much of which is controls related and probably won't change that much from one meeting to the next. So the intention moving forward is to provide a more summarised overview to GAC at relevant points throughout the year, as I alluded to earlier. Setting out the key activity that's maybe taken place during that period since the last report was presented to this committee, and then bring a more detailed update like this one on an annual basis. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gareth. Does anyone have any questions for Gareth? Any points to raise? David?
Sorry. Just one question, Gareth. I know it's early days, but the £1,000 spend control panel consideration, is that in process now, or is it? I know it's early days.
Yeah, it was implemented at the beginning of October. I think there was a great deal of work that went into, I guess, designing that and making it work. It would be difficult to do that kind of thing on a financial system that was, you know, you'd had for many years. Obviously, we were doing that on a financial system that we'd not had for 12 months at that time. So that did present, I guess, both challenges and opportunities in terms of getting what we wanted out of the system and to do it in a way which gave us the opportunity to challenge and review expenditure before it was incurred, but also mindful that we didn't want to create unnecessary barriers to staff in doing their job and obviously the payments that do need to be made. So there's an awful lot of thought and effort gone into designing it. There's two different panels that meet, just to give a bit more detail on that. There's a panel which will look at, I guess, what I would term as non-exempt expenditure. So there's certain types of expenditure, obviously, which we have no choice over. It's not negotiable. It's not up for debate. So anything that we're legally contracted to, anything that's in relation to maybe safeguarding vulnerable people, so social care, housing, homelessness, that kind of stuff. In the main, a lot of those key payments don't go anywhere near the panel. They just get made. So there's a panel that meets 3 times a week, looking at anything between 1,000 and 25,000. There's a separate panel that will meet twice a week, looking at anything above 25. And then there's also a procurement board process that's looking at what we're looking and wanting to maybe tender before we actually do that detailed work around that, and making sure that we're clear and have got oversight of those decisions that are being made at the very beginning, and also an opportunity to challenge, and there's chief officers and senior officers that sit on those panels. So I think what I'm keen to get, it is very early days, as you say, Dave. I think what I'm keen to get is some analysis that enables us over a period of time, because you will get peaks and troughs from one month to the next. I think the signs are positive in terms of the volume and value of the spend that was incurred in October compared to the previous month, but there's other factors in play there. I suspect that maybe more stuff would have been put through perhaps in September, as people were aware that these things are being introduced. There was also things like half term in October, but the trend was positive, albeit I'd caveat that with it was very early days in the process. So we do need to get that information that enables us to monitor that. And also, I think there is a deterrent effect here as well. So it's difficult. You don't know what hasn't come through. You know, I think a lot of the things that we're seeing at panel that are getting rejected are maybe getting rejected not because it shouldn't happen, but because maybe there isn't sufficient supporting information to enable the approval to take place, whether that be backing to support the value, the accuracy, confirmation of the funding source, is it value for money. So we've tightened that side up with the new system, which you couldn't have done on the old system, in fairness. So that's a positive. So it's early days. It was a challenge to try and strike that appropriate balance, I think, between like I say, between causing disruption to the day-to-day work within services, but also having that that robust process in place to give us that additional rigor over the spend, which obviously is the angle that we're looking at, but we have to be mindful of the service delivery and the impact on residents as well. Yeah, and you know, I think what we're, you know, there's a communication that will be going out to staff in the next week or so, just to give some feedback as well, because what we have noticed over the past 7 or 8 weeks that it's been in, we have noticed a significant improvement in the quality of information that's coming through as well. So there is that, and this isn't a financial, that's not a spend control. That's just tightening a control that probably should have been there already in terms of our spend. So it's just a case of building on that. It's educating staff in many ways in terms of that side of it, because a lot of these staff sit outside of finance, and it's not, you know, we you know, I know from your background, you're very much focused on controls and evidence, and that not everyone is of that mindset. So it is trying to take people on a journey.
Phil. Oh.
Been an increase in the number of invoices going through for 750 quid. Not that I'm suspicious.
No, it's I think it's called professional skepticism, isn't it? It's something that we've been acutely aware of from the beginning, that there is scope to circumvent and abuse, if you like, what the intention of the controls is. What we are doing is, in terms of the spend that's below 1,000, it's actually £1,000 including VAT, actually, the way it's been set up. So it's actually a lot less than £1,000. You know, there was concerns around maybe people splitting invoices as well to bring it below that threshold. Again, early days, there's no evidence that that's happening that I've seen. I want to get a bit more data in time, but we are also going to be doing some work along with internal audit as well, looking at spot checking some of that expenditure between 0 and 1,000, basically, to make sure, because whether you're spending £500 or £5,000, it's public money at the end of the day. So there needs to be that rigor and that consideration of value for money, and also approvers need to be making sure that they're happy that everything is accurate and it stacks up, and that it has to happen as well. That, you know, if it doesn't need to happen, we shouldn't be incurring it in our financial position at the minute.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Just a really quick one about the panel and the £1,000 limit. I just wondered if we could have a bit more information about the turnaround time for that panel getting through invoices. The reason being is I was made aware a couple of weeks ago that a invoice for room hire and heating and other utilities incurred by one of the teams at Conway was pulled up into this panel and was held there for, well, I was led to believe it was held for a couple of weeks. As the agreement with the landowner stated, that landlord, could incur interest for each day that the invoice was overdue payments. They didn't apply the interest to the payments, but it was something that just concerned me. It's great that we're doing these checks, but are we just making sure that we're doing it in a quick enough way that we're not incurring any additional charges for overdue invoices? Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Tom. I haven't got the detail for that, but what I can say, and I guess it just builds on the previous answer, really, that the panel that would be looking at that kind of expenditure will be meeting 3 times a week, and there's nothing, and I've been at all those panels with Sinead, there's nothing that has been held up that I would recognise on the basis of what you're saying. That's the reason we're meeting three times a week, is to get through everything. Now, anything that isn't approved at that point is referred back to officers for further information. Where sometimes delay is built into the process is where it's not getting approved initially in order for it to then come to panel for that consideration. So it's possible that that's happened. But if you want to send me the information outside of this, and I'm more than happy to look into that and come back to you with the detailed response.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily that I have a burning issue with that particular case. It was just something that I thought that we should be mindful of. But if you're confident that we're getting through the invoices and maybe meeting 3 times a week, then I'm pretty assured that there's nothing being held up too long there. But yeah, I just wanted to be sure that we're not incurring unnecessary overdue payment charges. But that's great. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Can I just very quickly ask a follow-up question to that? Are we talking invoices, or are we talking commitments, orders? Or is it a mix?
Requisitions? Yeah. So it's basically requests to spend before anything is committed. There's no purchase order raised until it's actually approved. So it's,
okay,
you know, and there are one of the elements that we're feeding back to staff, and we are noticing it's been actually a really good process, because it's meaning that myself and Sinead would get to see things that maybe wouldn't ordinarily see, and then we can flag those with services where there is perhaps a bit of a concern. But things like retrospective orders, you know, where the spend has been committed to in advance, and that's coming to panel, and actually there's nothing that a panel can do about that because you have to pay it. So it's identifying those kind of things where they are happening, and then we're feeding that back to the services. So there will be some circumstances where that might be an acceptable course of action, but it's the exception rather than the norm, and it is something that we have identified at panel. You know, and some of it might be because of the delays that Councillor Tom was referring to in actually getting the requisition approved, and there's been other discussions going on outside of you know, either verbally with a supplier, for example, or via email outside of any finance system. So it's just trying to tighten those processes and controls as well. But it's requisitions rather than invoices.
That's what my understanding had been, but it was just the sort of content of that conversation that was leading me more towards invoices than commitments and orders. And I thought, oh goodness, it's too late when you're looking at the invoice. Okay.
So Tom had his hand up. He wanted to come back.
Oh, Councillor Tom, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that a bit further. Yeah, I think in this case it may have been that the service had already committed the spend, and perhaps by the sounds of things they hadn't gone through the panel at that point, and then when the invoice went in, that's when it was pulled up by the panel. So yeah, it might be like Gareth, you were saying that the service had committed to spend perhaps without going through the correct channels first, so that might be why there was a hold up with that one, or a bit of misunderstanding with that one. But yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Gareth.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Tom. Nigel, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Gareth, the report and the comment I want to give, I'll give in a moment, but just in terms of an immediate feedback to Amanda and the leader, that I thought the SITFA session was really positive and productive, and has been useful, I think, across the council. I think it's essentially within the GAC that we are mindful that one of the roles we have is potentially to put a protection around the decisions of the council to ensure that we don't end up in a Section 114 situation. And to do that, we do need open, transparent and timely reports. And the report on the agenda today, I think, is helpful in terms of doing that. I'm mindful, however, that one of the reports that we've not yet seen is the Audit Wales report on financial sustainability. This has, of course, gone to a number of other authorities, and for example, Flintshire and Denbighshire have considered that report, or in the process of considering that report at their GACs. Within that report, the third question line that Audit Wales follow in that report is essentially, do the council's reporting arrangements support regular oversight of its financial sustainability? And the part of the purpose of this report that you have here, I think, contributes and enables us to sort of partly answer that. But it would be ideal had we got the other Audit Wales report to informed the debate this morning, which is why I came back to the timeliness of reports on the GAC work programme, because if we can try and pull in those external reports, it will certainly assist in terms of giving an early heads up and view about issues in relation to the authority. And I know that previously the officers have had a line of wishing to retain consideration of that report until the publication of a national report. I understand that, but I think in this particular case, I still would have thought that it would be better in an open and transparent way, in a timeliness way, to have been able to have given earlier consideration. Specifically on the report in front of us, there is reference to the Prudential Code, which is on page 38, number 1.38. A couple of meetings ago, Amanda gave what I thought was a really useful PowerPoint presentation, set of slides on the financial circumstances of the council. What we did raise with her in questioning about that was that there was a lack of full coverage of the capital and the implications of funding the capital programme in relation to the revenue consequences for the council, which I think is a serious and considerable challenge. So when you look at the Prudential Code reference, Gareth, on here, what the Prudential Code section in my reading does is it flags up the requirement for a treasury management strategy, and then reports back on the quarterly reporting that you and others do in relation to the treasury management strategy implementation. And again, the member workshop on that on the Friday afternoon was very helpful. What it also does in this Prudential Code thing is flag the requirement for a capital strategy produced before the financial year within which it goes into operation. What it doesn't show and enable is a tracking then of the capital strategy back into the GAC in the way that you get an update in relation to the treasury management strategy. So I wonder whether, Gareth, it's worth exploring further how the subsequent reporting back on the capital programme occurs. Because I'm mindful in terms of, if you look at the trend of the cost of the capital programme on our revenue budget, in terms of the figures I was looking at in terms of a 6% hit over a period of the next 2, 3, 4 years, and expansion of the capital programme over the next 2, 3, 4 years, the implications for that for an authority struggling to avoid a section 114 are significant. And I think is an area potentially where you might wish to strengthen the method of review and consequently the method of reporting back on financial sustainability to the GAC. So that's my first sort of major question on the paper in front of us.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Do you want to respond to that, Gareth?
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I'm not too sure, Nigel, what the actual question was there, other than I'm happy to take away the comments you've made around what and look into what we can do, you know, to give that additional assurance in terms of when we bring the capital monitoring report comes to scrutiny on a quarterly basis. So maybe if we can look to potentially expand and include something within that, I'm happy to take that away and look at that in a similar way we do with the Treasury report that comes here, obviously on a quarterly basis. So yeah, I'm not too clear what the question was, other than a suggestion from you, which I'm happy to look into.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I'd be happy, Gareth, with that. I just think it's an area we could strengthen in terms of tracking to ensure the financial oversight by GAC is effective in relation to capital in particular. The second question I had was if we end up moving into a section 114 scenario, who and which body is responsible for what decision and what action? And I'm mindful, for example, of when commissioners are called and required to walk into an authority. I'm unclear in my own mind, and I wonder whether officers are able to clarify any further how and when that process should take place and can take place.
Yeah, I think there is some there's some work being done at Welsh Government level to clarify that process in Wales at the moment. I think it's less clear than it perhaps is in England, with no authority having gone through that process. Ultimately, in terms of you know, there's not a lot more I can probably say on that until we get that steer from Welsh Government really around what that would look like. Should any Section 151 officer take the view that the authority had no option other than to issue a Section 114 notice. So I know from discussions at WLGA events that work is underway. I think there was a group that met in February of this year and was developing that over the autumn. But there's been no information that I've seen in the time that's passed since that would give a clear view on what the actual process would be and how that would look should an authority find itself in that position in Wales.
Thank you, Chair. And if that is the case and remains the case, then it might be helpful if we could minute that we support the clarification of this matter in discussions at a national level. I think that it would be prudent so to do. And if Gareth could pursue that liaison with colleagues, either in WLGA or elsewhere, I think that would be a good thing. The third question I had, and allied to that, was that we clearly have a regime whereby council tax setting in England is encumbered by the imposition of council tax capping at either 3 or 5%, depending on the particular statutory requirements. Within Wales, we're not restricted by that council tax capping. The reason I raise this is that sometimes authorities believe that they can go cap in hand for special exceptional financial circumstances. And within England, that has happened on several occasions. I wonder whether we could pursue clarification of the entitlement within Wales to such funding, given that council tax capping does not exist in Wales, and whether in reality the ability to secure additional funding is therefore hampered, or that authorities are disqualified in Wales from that particular route, because it does mean effectively that the councils are in charge of their own destiny more in Wales in terms of levels of council tax rises than potentially is the case in England. And I think that some clarification in that area, again, would be useful, Chair. And I don't know whether Gareth is privy to discussions that are taking place either with SIP or other bodies on that clarification with government. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Gareth?
Yeah, it's wrapped up in as part of the same answer I gave previously, Nigel, around the what would the process be in terms of a 114? It would be the same in terms of what would the process be in terms of a request from any authority for any additional support funding or capitalisation direction. So it's all wrapped up as part of those discussions at Welsh Government level, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Shall we move on, Nigel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Do let others.
Thank you. Councillor Charlie.
Sorry, it was just to build on Gareth's answer, Nigel. The Chief Executive wrote a letter specifically to Welsh Government asking for full clarity on what a 114 process would look like in Wales, and it's something I've raised several times at a WLGA level. As Gareth said, there's still a few grey areas that need to be bottomed out, but it is clearly something that we need to absolutely know exactly what the consequences would be. That was part of bringing SIPFA to full council the other day, so they could outline how it's worked in England, but clearly we need to know how that would be in a Wales specific situation. With regards to the capital spend, yeah, the Q2 reports coming to Cabinet tomorrow. The documents are there on the agenda. Gives a really detailed explanation. We are, as members, acutely aware of the effect on capital spend on our revenue further down the line. That said, of our capital programme, from memory, it's about 101 million over a number of years. I think it's increased by about £500,000, but actually that's due to some things decommissioning. It's due to additional grant. I think we've received an extra £2.5 million of grant this year to deliver some of those capital projects. And there is always a balance. Conway has the longest stretch of defended coastline in the UK. So during the Crump scheme, we get 85% funding from Welsh Government. We've still got to find the other 15% to carry out those works, but they are absolutely vital to protect, many thousands of households. Members will remember the floods in Tywin, as we've seen over the last few days of the weekend, that there are some really serious consequences, but we are very mindful of any sort of future spend on a revenue basis. But as always, it's a balancing act between obtaining external funding and delivering necessary works. But just to give you the reassurance that we're fully cognizant of the impact it has on future revenue budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Does anyone have any other questions or points to raise for Gareth? No. Okay. Can I? A good discussion, I think. So we have 3 recommendations. One was to note the financial management and stewardship arrangements in place within the council, to take assurance from previous internal work on compliance with SITFA financial management, and to note the current work being undertaken to respond to in-year financial pressures. Please can I ask for a proposer and support? Thank you, Phil. And a seconder, please. Thank you, David. And finally, a show of hands in support of those recommendations. Yeah, I think it's unanimous, Sally. Thank you very much. And now, and thank you, Gareth, for that and for taking the questions. So now we move on to item 8A, which is the audited annual finance and governance report for 2023-24. Thank you, Gareth. You're on again.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was the last committee, members will remember, hopefully, that we presented the draft accounts in September for consideration and discussion, and there was a number of questions asked at that committee. So just to update on that, really, the audit work has now concluded, and Audit Wales are proposing that an unqualified audit opinion be issued and that the accounts are certified on that basis. And this report today presents for approval the Council's audited accounts for 2023-24, so the year ended 31st of March 24. I can see Audit Wales colleagues online now, which is good. Thank you. It also introduces, as I said, Audit Wales' audit of accounts report, which includes the final letter of representation. It was the intention to also have the Harbour Authority annual return approved today. But having discussed it with Mike Jones at Audit Wales, they're finalising their work on it. So the approval and certification of that will be done separately later this week. But just to reassure members, there's no issues with the return, and I'm sure Mike will provide a verbal update on that when I hand over to him shortly. It's really pleasing from my perspective that we've managed to achieve the revised 30th of November deadline. I think there's been various points throughout both the production of the accounts and then the audit window where I did have 1 or 2 doubts that we would achieve it, just because of the volume of work that's involved and all the other work that we're doing at the same time. So that's really positive. I'd like to thank both officers at the council and also Mike Davitt and the audit team at Audit Wales, because, as I say, there's an awful lot of work that goes into getting to this position today. And for context, the 22-23 accounts were only certified in May of this year. And this is also the first set of accounts that we've produced using data from the Technology One finance system, which again is another milestone. As is the norm, as is usual, there are some amendments to the draft accounts, but nothing that has any impact on the final outturn position. And there was one amendment that we chose not to make in relation to the disclosure of school bridging loans. That will impact on debtors in earmarked reserves, and we'll tidy that up when we produce the 24-25 accounts. It was only just above trivial level, and because of the way that flowed through various different parts of the accounts, we chose not to make that amendment, which is a perfectly acceptable position to take. Members, I'm sure, will appreciate having also receiving the draft and the final set of these accounts now, that they are lengthy, they're detailed, they're technical, they're documents that are both complex and time consuming to prepare, but also then to support through the audit process, like I've mentioned. So thanks to Hugh, who's sat alongside me, and also Ewan, who's online, who lead on this work on a day-to-day basis, along with colleagues in finance and across the wider organisation, for their work in producing what I think is a good set of accounts and a good outcome for the council. Just very quickly before I pass over to Audit Wales, it was good from my perspective to have some on-site external audit presence this time, which is the first time, albeit for a few days, but it was the first time in 4 or 5 years that we've had that. And for me, it really helps in getting through queries more efficiently, being able to understand asks from the auditors and explain things back to them so that they're clearer in concluding their work. And I hope that we can build on that next year when we'll be working to have a certified set of accounts a month earlier at the end of October. So the members will recall the timetable is gradually coming back to where it used to be maybe in pre-COVID days. That's probably all I've got to say for now. So I'll hand over to Mike Jones from Audit Wales, who will take you through their report.
Thank you, Gareth. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Can I just confirm everyone can hear me? 2 thumbs up. You have to excuse my voice. I've got a bit of the traditional man flu at this time of year. So I'll just respond to some of the, before I move on to the actual ISA 260 report, I'll just respond to what Gareth has just been outlining. So first of all, the Harbour Authority, which I think is down as one of the papers here, which we haven't got. Just to confirm what Gareth was saying, we're undertaking that work at the moment. It's not actually a full audit, so we don't give you a report on it. We just basically sign off to say we've examined these and we've got no issues with them. So I think that can be minuted, that it's ongoing, and we anticipate that being signed off before the end of November. If that wasn't the case, then we would update this committee in the next meeting of the committee, but we're not anticipating that. So it's just to confirm that is underway. If I'm honest, it's probably an oversight on my behalf in terms of the first year that I've managed this. Didn't realise actually that report came to this, that review came to this committee. So we'll rectify that for future years, and just means doing it a few weeks earlier. Secondly, underlining Gareth's, again, it's been the audit process. We also probably had a few doubts. It's challenging, but I think we've worked well together. And just to confirm and give my thanks to the finance team and the cooperation that we've received, and to give members that assurance that we have had the cooperation that we require and the information we required to fulfill the audit. And thirdly, yeah, I think I would agree that being on site certainly for part of the audit did help, certainly in terms of clearing some queries and just building those working relationships. So we will be looking to do more of that in the future. So that's in response to Gareth's introduction and a few issues that he's raised there. Just to take you very briefly through the ISA 260 report, which is our report on our audit of the full accounts, very complex accounts, as Gareth alluded to. Fairly straightforward report, given the complex accounts. So yeah, just to confirm, we are intending to give an unqualified audit opinion on the 29th. Just to confirm our materiality, which we set out in our audit plan, so it's just under 5 million for this year, although some areas, as per normal, have a lower materiality because of their sensitivity or interest to the reader. Just quickly take you through page 10 on the audit report, which is issues arising. Some of these Gareth alluded to, but I'm just required to go through them. Firstly, there was one uncorrected misstatement, which we've identified, which Gareth has quite rightly says it's quite a small amount, but we are required to report that to you because it's not been amended. It's just a classification issue, one balance and another. But I think you are formally asked just to confirm that you're happy that you aren't amending that. We're happy with it, it's not material, but I think the members just need to confirm that in the minutes, that one uncorrected misstatement. will not be corrected. Secondly, there were a number of corrected misstatements, and they are listed for your information at Appendix 3. I'm not going to go through those in any detail, and there's nothing I would draw your attention to specifically. And thirdly, whilst there were no significant issues or problems that we've identified, we do just point out there that deadlines are coming forward for next year and the year after. So we're just pointing out that we need to work together really to be able to meet those deadlines, and we'll be meeting with the finance team over the next couple of months on a bit of lessons learned, post-project learning, just to see if there are things we can do better to make sure we meet those deadlines for the future. That's probably a quick run through of an awful lot of work from both sides, but happy to take any questions from members.
Does anyone have any questions for Gareth or Mike? Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. And we have seen drafts of papers, and I think that's been helpful to get the committee to a better position of knowledge and understanding. So well done. A couple of questions from me. One is speculative, one is specific. The speculative is to say under the page 6, 7 of the report, the reference to usable reserves and then the reduction in council fund balance is clearly a challenge for the authority going forward. And I wondered in that connection whether any of the gurus sat around this Zoom call had any later indication from Welsh Government as to the likely decisions to be made in December. That's the speculative. The second one is specifically in relation to when is the triennial review of the valuation of the pension scheme next due, because the impact of that may be helpful or unhelpful depending on the result. Thank you, Chair. Those are my two first.
Thank you, Nigel.
Okay, I'll take the speculative one first, I think, because that's probably the shortest answer and the quickest one, Nigel. No, I guess is the answer. There's speculation. As you can imagine, I think we've moved from a situation where pre-budget, as in UK Westminster budget, we had some certainty, I guess, around what we thought we might be getting, which was very little, if anything, and we're working on that basis. Obviously, that has shifted considerably with the various different announcements. So at the moment, we're in a position where we know we've got some significant additional costs on the back of the changes that were made in and announced in the budget. What we don't yet have and won't have until the 11th of December is an understanding of exactly what that means in terms of what we will receive in additional funding to meet those costs and possibly other pressures that we're facing as a sector, not just as an authority as well. So there's an awful lot of I guess uncertainty at the moment, which has made this period between the budget and having the Welsh Government settlement announced quite a tricky one, really, in terms of being able to plan. So it's almost working on a worst case scenario basis, and there'll be some reports that come through Democracy next week that set out as we start to bring the budget reports through, really. But it's very difficult until we get that confirmation from Welsh Government around exactly what it means, and obviously then the pieces will hopefully start to fall into place, and we'll know exactly what we have and what we need to do to make sure we balance next February. In terms of the second point, was around the triennial revaluation, wasn't it? I think it's the 31st of March 25, which will I'm trying to will that feed into next year's account? So I'm looking at Hugh while I'm talking here. Will it be the year after? So it'll be a 2025, 26 impact potentially, but it is something obviously we've got our eye on as well.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Nigel, are you okay with that?
No, I'm happy, Chair. Thank you for the comments back and the speculation.
Okay. Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments or questions to raise? It's always an interesting item because, as you say, it's technically challenging, it's voluminous, and yet there are not barrow loads of questions. I don't think that's because people misunderstand it. I think it is very much because over the years things have got much better on the accounts. There's much improved explanation, and I always learn something new year on year, and I've been looking at these now for about 7 years. So, but lots of plaudits to you, Gareth, Hugh, and your team, and many thanks to Mike and his team as well, because indeed you've met tight timetables. You've helped us better understand the accounts, certainly than better understood them this year than last year. And last year I was making similar comments that we'd made good progress. So thank you for all of that. And now we are being, with the exclusion of the Conwy Harbour accounts, where we cannot look for a proposer or seconder at this point. I will see those, and I imagine the whole GAC will have the opportunity to see those Conwy Harbour accounts, will we? Just as a
Not
or will they
before
just
they get signed off. The draft has come here. The draft came to the last committee, and it is, if you recall, it's literally a 2-page document with numbers, and it's been subject to internal audit prior to going to external
audit. I just
audit.
wondered whether the final version would be shared with all members of the committee.
We can do that, yeah.
Yeah, but and then I can confirm to Hugh that I'm happy. So we'll exclude that recommendation from what follows. So in the first instance, I'm looking for a proposer and a seconder in support of the recommendations, which was that the Governance and Audit Committee approve the Annual Finance and Governance Report 23-24, including the audited final statement of accounts and the annual governance statement, and that we as a committee agree the contents of the final letter of representation, and you authorise me to append my my signature to that. So thank you, Phil, for proposing, and can I seek a seconder, please? Thank you, David. And finally, a show of hands, please. I think once again that's unanimous. Oh, sorry, Nigel, you have a question.
Oh, I was showing support for your recommendation, Chair.
Ah, right. Rather than waving your hand. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Gareth and Hugh. Now, time is indeed marching on, but can we just move on? And thank you, Mike. So we move on to our next agenda item, which is Treasury Management Update for Q2 of 2024-25. And Gareth, you taking this one as well?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the regular quarterly information report that provides an update to the committee on treasury management activity undertaken in the quarter. So this is Q2 of 24-25, so up to 30th of September. The key points, as always, of the report are within Appendix A, which provides the external context and also the economic background, which is always an interesting read. So as at the 30th of September, the council's borrowing decreased during the year by 11.6 million, and investments decreased also by 4.8 million. Now, a lot of that is just a timing issue, as we've discussed before, as we manage the cash flow and as essentially as investments mature. I've previously referenced our desire at committee to replace some of the short-term borrowing exposure that we have with longer-term PWLB borrowing. Mindful that locks in some interest rate certainty and reduces our exposure to any short-term economic shocks, as we've seen a number of in the past decade or so. And we did do that during the quarter. We took out two 5 million loans for 10 and 11 years respectively. These things are always a little bit of a judgment call in terms of you're not too sure what might change in the future, which, when you look back in hindsight can make you look like you've either made a good decision or not so good decision. I think certainly what's happened in the period since we took those loans out would support and make that look like an eminently sensible thing to have done. And that's despite the Bank of England reducing interest rates during the quarter, because what we've seen since I'm probably straying into a future Q3 update now, but what we've seen since the UK government budget and the US election is that there's been quite a significant increase in some of the cost of borrowing to us on a longer term basis. So it was good to have locked those in. I think there's more to do in that regard, and we are actively looking at that when the opportunity arises in discussion with our Treasury advisors, Arlene Close. I guess on that note, I'm sorry I couldn't make the session on Friday. I got pulled into other stuff with Amanda's leave on the horizon, so she was keen to brief me on various different things. But from what I can gather, the feedback was positive from the members that attended, and I think there was really good attendance at that session as well, which is brilliant from my perspective for a Friday afternoon as well. So thank you for those that did attend. I guess the only other thing for me to say really is that we continue to comply with our prudential indicators, and the recommendation is that Governance and Audit Committee note the update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Are there any questions or observations? Nigel. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Page 212 is going back to capital financing requirements, Gareth. That the table there, and I don't know if the leader's still in the room, but there's clearly on the capital expenditure on general fund, first table going from 44 million to 51 million to 63 million over the next 3 years. And my assessment of that is at 6.19% going up to 6.39% in terms of its impact on net revenue. Given my earlier comments, that is an area where I do think close tracking or review is important. And I also, whether we actively look at slipping capital programs, having regard to the implications of Welsh Government announcements and similar, whether we do that on an active, proactive basis rather than a reactive basis. So just seeking some reassurance given the trend that's showing there and the continuing financial challenge that we know is facing the council.
Thank you, Nigel. Gareth?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, a significant proportion of that, I think, Nigel, is grant funded as well, which doesn't come across in those figures. And I know that we've exchanged correspondence, and I think you've mentioned it in committee as well, around your understandable desire, I guess, to have some assurance, independent assurance, if that's the right phrase, around the affordability of our capital programme, given the impact it has on revenue. The leader's not in the room now anymore. He had to leave, unfortunately. But I guess just to build on that, one of the points he was making earlier, it does come that there has to be a balance struck at some point where the cost of not doing something on our revenue becomes more of a burden than the actual cost of doing something and replacing assets or improving assets. And for example, things like fleet, it would be the obvious one that jumps out there, where there's an increase in exposure to maintenance and repair costs for an aging fleet if we don't do anything about that. So, it is something that I am discussing and have been discussing with Stephen at Arling Close. And there will be something, I don't propose to bring it to committee, but I will circulate it outside of committee. I have been back and forth with them on getting their view on it. I guess what they will be loath to do is to give any real indication around our revenue expenditure, because obviously they can assess the capital programme and the affordability in that context, but what they can't get involved in is the other decisions that are being made around the day-to-day spending that the council undertakes. We are, I think we have been, whether you call it proactive or reactive, in the last couple of years, certainly since I arrived, and not that that's a factor as such, but in my time here, there has been a deliberate, I guess, what's the word? I was going to say ploy, but it's not a ploy. There's a deliberate strategy, if you like, of scaling back our capital programme, because Amanda was of the view, with interest rates increasing sharply like they did, that what had been agreed and committed to and put into the capital programme wasn't affordable, given the financial pressures that we were facing, and also our reserves position, in terms of the reserves not being at the level we would like to give us that resilience that we would ideally have. So in terms of deferring expenditure and deferring and pushing back, they're things that we are regularly in discussion with around services, and some of the questions that were talked about earlier around the spend controls, and the spend controls are also capital, goes through that as well as revenue expenditure, just to provide some clarity on that. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. One of the questions that is asked when before it gets to panel, approvers are asked, does this spend need to happen now? Can it be scaled back? Can it be delayed? And that's one of the specific questions that they have to respond to. Because obviously, if we are able to, and a lot of the stuff we're not, the big stuff like the coastal improvements that have to happen, and obviously we've seen the impact and the need for that over the weekend, really, in other areas, unfortunately. So where we can, we are having those discussions, and we are through instruction and through the process we have in place, actively doing that. So I think it is more than reactive. So effectively, and that just delivers the slippage that you were talking about ultimately, doesn't it? And again, that assessment of does it need to happen, I think, is an important one. And there's been an awful lot. I think there was 60 million that was taken out of the capital programme last year alone. And obviously we're going to be looking ahead. Going back to, I guess, I am going to speculate now a little bit, because going back to your speculative point earlier, where there does seem to be a little bit of positivity is around what may come through in terms of capital, what's coming through into Welsh Government's budget in terms of capital, and how that might flow through. Now, what we don't know yet, obviously, is how Welsh Government are going to choose to spend that money, and whether it's going to go to, obviously, we hear a lot about the state of the hospital estate. So there's decisions to be made there which will impact, but obviously we're hopeful that there may be some additional capital grant, and obviously grant rather than allocation is better, because that's money that we can just spend without any financial implication for us directly. So yeah, slightly speculative there, but there was some positivity in the room that I was in last week on that, where Welsh Government officials were not that they were giving anything away, but I think the mood music in terms of capital does seem better than it was. So, and obviously that will help us in terms of what is in the programme and some of the things that we know we need to do as an authority with a wide range of assets.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Councillor Cheryl, it's just been pointed out to me that you have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair. And apologies if I put my camera on, the whole thing crashes. The perils of having thick walls in your house. Thank you for letting me speak, Chair. Just going back to the checks and balances and questions around capital spend. In FROSC last week, Finance and Resources scrutiny last week, Councillor Gareth Jones asked, can we afford the 2 million Conway contribution for the cycle track from Junction to Betws-y-Coed? The 2 million is the contribution to go with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Have those questions been thoroughly asked, please, Gareth? Because there was a lot of doubt raised about it in FROSC last week. Thank you. Diolch, Chair.
Thank you. Gareth?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was doing a treasury management update, so you know, I can answer that as best as I can. I think from my recollection of FROSC, it was a 10% matched funding contribution, where we as an authority received 80 million levelling up funding, I think it was, rather than shared prosperity funding. So I would imagine that those decisions were taken quite clearly at the outset, and it's difficult. Yeah, I think I recall the leader answering the question actually at FROSC. I think it's difficult as an organisation to turn down £18 million worth of funding, given the benefits that can have to the wider community.
Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you. Councillor Gronwy.
Oh, thank you. Just in response to the question Councillor Cheryl, a full explanation was given in the scrutiny meeting. So that, as I said, full clarification on the match funding was given, and there was no further questions asked on that.
Thank you. Your point is noted. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Later on in the agenda, there's a few items on the, I think it's the risk register, about vehicles and lack of ability to get replacements, and therefore the cost going up for maintenance and in vehicles. So it strikes me, if this increase in the capital programme is going to allow us to replace very costly older vehicles, then you're going to see a revenue saving. So it's going to impact well on your revenue budget, isn't it? To spend this money on new vehicles instead of trying to keep old vehicles on the road. I mean, we've been there before.
Yeah. No, I think that's the point I was making earlier, Phil, around with the likes of an aging fleet, there comes a point where you're spending more to keep old vehicles on the road than you would if you were to borrow and obviously pay interest over a long period to replace those with new, modern, more reliable vehicles. So yes, there might not necessarily be a saving. It might be that you're obviously incurring those borrowing costs instead of the maintenance costs, but you've got a more reliable fleet, so it makes you more resilient as well. But I think not wanting to preempt anything that may come through in future meetings, there's always a capital bid from ERF for fleet, and I think that's something that we need to look carefully at as an organisation for the reasons you've set out.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Oh, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Just for something completely different, given the developments on the other side of the big pond of the last few weeks, I was looking at page 209 and money market funds, Gareth and maybe Hugh. What is the current situation with regard to speculation in cryptocurrency?
It's not something we get involved in. We don't actually use money market funds at the moment, Nigel, either. It's something that I know are used elsewhere for short term in the main overnight or for a few days investments, just in terms of managing that cash flow position. But it's not something that we've put into place at Conway. I'm not too sure around the historical background of why that is, but actually we're getting, as you recall, we're getting pretty good returns from what we do at the moment. And obviously to do additional, given the resources we have within the team, and it's pretty much Ruth, supported by one or two colleagues on top of their day-to-day work that will run the treasury management function. So I'm loath to change anything and start to add additional asks of them at the moment, given that situation really. But I don't think we'd actually benefit too much from money market funds. But I can't imagine us or Arlene Close, for that matter, being happy with us. Crypto is not a word that I've heard mentioned in any of the discussions with them. I'll probably leave it at that.
Yeah, through you, Chair. My concern, Gareth, is that we retain a 2 million limit column reference, which might suggest sort of some dabbling somewhere. And I'm reassured by your cautious approach, notwithstanding some of the rhetoric we hear from the other side of the Atlantic. But thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Oh, Gareth.
Yeah, sorry, Nigel. Just to provide clarification on that, the money market funds there will be with stable, secure financial institutions. So it won't be anything like, it's not playing the stock market directly or anything like that. It is, and it will be only using those that are on the approved counterparty list, if you like, that Arlene Close will have. So, and I would anticipate that other authorities that you'll be aware of are probably already using that kind of thing. I know they were at Flintshire, and it's a good tool to have, but that's very different from crypto.
Thank you, Gareth. I think perhaps you picked up the use of the word dabbling, which Nigel used. Okay. Oh, Councillor Chris.
Yeah, I just want to thank Gareth for arranging the Friday afternoon session on Treasury Management. Yes. I think the turnout was really good considering it was a Friday afternoon, and it was well introduced by Hugh. Yeah, and Stephen Kitching and Paul Roberts, you know, are very good speakers and presenters. So I certainly learnt a lot, and I went to the previous year's one as well. So I think it's become an annual event, has it? Yeah, so I think I would really recommend it. And as I say, a lot of elected members did come, and we didn't mention cryptocurrency once. So perhaps we will next year, Chair. Anyway, thank you for arranging that.
Yeah. I think we'll have to store it away in the memory banks and ensure that someone does raise it. Nigel, that's with you. Okay. No other points. So the recommendation is that the Governance and Audit Committee note the Treasury Management Q2 update. Do we have a proposer, please? Councillor Stephen, thank you. And a seconder? Phil, thank you very much. And finally, a show of hands, please. 2, 3. Yeah, I think we're unanimous again, Sally. Thank you. Welcome, Fran. Welcome, Matt. I realise it's quite a long agenda. I'm trying to judge where will be the best point to propose a break. I saw you arriving, Fran, and I thought, well, no, it's not really appropriate to have you arriving and then calling a break. So perhaps if we take item 9A, which is the panel performance assessment arrangements, and then following that, we can have a short break before we move on to risks and external reports, etc. Does that make sense? And then, yeah. Okay. So now I'm not sure, Matt, are you taking this?
If that's all right, Chair, and I will hand over to Fran so that she's able to discuss in a bit more detail the actual requirements, etc. The report, Chair, it's about the need to make detailed arrangements for the Council's panel performance assessment as required by Local Government Elections Wales Act 2021. And that Act requires the Council to make arrangements so at least once during a period between two consecutive ordinary elections of councillors to the Council, a panel's appointed by the Council to assess the extent to which it's meeting their performance requirements. And in the current case, therefore, that means that period needs to be at some point before around May 2027, which is the likely date of the next local elections. The performance requirements themselves are defined as the extent to which a council's exercising its functions effectively, using its resources economically, efficiently and effectively, and has effective governance in place for securing those matters. The report sets out the details of the consultation requirements and also the 3 stages for assessment, which includes preparation stage, assessment and also follow-up. Those matters are detailed at 3.4 of the report. But Fran, as I've said before, he's also here to speak on those matters in a bit more detail as they relate specifically to performance. So I'm not going to speak about those in detail myself. I wanted to primarily speak about where the responsibility for the arrangements sit and the constitutional implications and also process around those matters. And that's because there is a slight quirk in the legislation as the responsibility for where the function for making all the arrangement actually sits within the council is a matter of local choice. So that means the council decides whether the function will either be council function or a cabinet function. And once that decision's been made, the constitution will actually need to be amended to reflect what the local position is here at Conway. So at paragraph 3.6, those matters are dealt with, Chair, and that sets out proposals for the arrangements here. And it's proposed that responsibility for making detailed arrangements for the panel performance assessment, so that's specifically the development of a scoping document and the appointment of the panel itself, which will need to be determined, in fact, by the needs identified in the scoping document, sits with Cabinet. And it's also proposed that drafting the response to the panel's report is a Cabinet function. And there are a few reasons for that. First of all, that's consistent really with how the council deals with other similar matters, such as decisions on budget, planning policy, or in fact other performance matters. And it's also almost certainly the most practicable approach because there are going to be lots of different reports requiring timely decisions at different times throughout the process of appointing and scoping the work of the panel, as well as agreeing the response, and the council will need to be quite agile during that process. The approach does maintain elected member input to the process and also holds Cabinet to account for the outcome. I also understand that this proposed approach is consistent with how panel performance assessments have been approached by other councils in Wales. Just in terms of process, a report will need to be taken to the Democratic Services Committee as the proposals will require an amendment to the Constitution. And those proposals will then be taken to full council for a decision. And the resolution of the committee today will be reflected in those reports. The committee will note from the report that the committee does have an important role in terms of preparing the detailed scoping documents for the assessment, and also will note that it's proposed that that document will be drafted next year between February and May. And that'll have input from the senior management team, Cabinet and this committee. The final scope and appointment of panellists will then go through democracy in June and July. So Cabinet would also need to feed back from, in terms of the management response. Fran will explain a little bit more about those matters as well, as the principle of subscribing to the WLGA's panel performance assessment model, which is attached to the report at Appendix 1. I would also mention the final outcome of the assessment is then presented at a full meeting of council. So the recommendations are that the committee considers those proposals, and that the committee notes the role of this committee in the scoping document for the assessment. And with that, Chair, I'll hand over to Fran to pick up any of the matters in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Matt, and bore da pawb. Yeah, I'm a bit of a stand-in today. Apologies, a bit of a second best, and I'd just like to note Iolo's apologies this morning, and also thank him for the extensive work he's put together, along with Janice Martin, for the reports that I'll present this morning on his behalf. So just in terms of how the panel performance assessment will work, and to give governance and audit assurance that even with the proposal to delegate some of the authority to Cabinet, there's still quite extensive involvement from governance and audit. Firstly, just to clarify, this is a statutory requirement that every local authority undertakes a panel performance assessment once during their administration, but it's not an audit. It is different. The scope is very much set, as Matt was explaining, set by the local authority, and it's around a framework of questions that need to be answered. That is the local authority exercising its function effectively, using resources economically, and does it have effective governance in place? And how it's different from an audit in terms of establishing the panel, it's pulling together a series of experts, I guess, based on the scope, the subject matter that the authority chooses to progress. So the panel will consist of an independent chair. There will be peers called upon either from public, private or voluntary sector who are particular experts in the field of the subject matter. And there will be a senior local government officer and senior local government elected member as part of that panel. I won't go into great detail given the time, but Iolo has described within the cover report the 3 stages of preparing for the panel assessment. As Matt mentioned there, pulling together the scope and then working with WLGA to actually appoint the performance assessment panel. We don't have to work with WLGA. We can do it independently as a local authority. However, as outlined in the report, that would be quite unwise. It would be an extreme stretch on our already stretched staff capacity and would incur costs to the council, whereas going through WLGA, the costs are covered and they have access to a pool of peers to assist us. So that's one decision that needs to be made, but is recommended that we go with WLGA. Once the panel's been formed, then there will be the stage 2 assessment. Again, this is quite extensive, 4-day assessment looking at document reviews, one-to-one interviews, focus groups. There'll be daily feedbacks to at the end of each day as to how the assessment's going, and a presentation of the key findings to the leader and chief executive at the end of the week. And then the final stage is the follow-up. So the panel will draft a report and we'll have the opportunity to check it for inaccuracies, quite tight deadlines of responding within 10 days of receipt. And then there will be a responsibility on us as an authority to draft a response to the report and basically an action plan as to how we're going to take forward any recommendations. And then that is publicly available. So as soon as practical after finalising the response, we must publish that and share that not only with Welsh ministers, but also with our external regulators as well. So quite an extensive piece of work, but to give assurance, something that as an authority we are well versed in. I was shocked to be reminded that we did a big piece of work like this. It was called corporate assessment back in the day. It was back in 2010. Time flies. But obviously we've had other quite extensive inspections, such as the Eston inspection last year. So I think we've got a good team of experienced officers that can work with members to implement this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Fran, and thank you, Matt. Do we have any observations or comment or questions? Bill?
Thank you, Fran, for that. Can I just ask, having read the Welsh Government's little paper at the end, it seems to me there's a lot to get through for 4 people in 6 days. I just wonder how in depth or how meaningful any report's going to be honest.
Good point, Phil. I guess it comes down to the subject matter that we pick, and obviously there are preparation days, so we will have to be organised in terms of the extent of the documentation we send in advance, and obviously they'll be doing work on site in terms of one-to-one interviews. What we do know is that those local authorities that have already had their panel assessment have found them an extremely useful process. So yeah, we've actually had a senior manager take part in a panel assessment elsewhere, and I understand it's long days, but yeah, the local authorities that have done it have found it useful.
Yes, my reading of it was or brought to mind one word, which was intense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Fran. Councillor David, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Question for Mrs. Lewis. Could you actually let us know how ordinary members of the public, residents that are paying the council tax, are going to be consulted? Because every time a resident comes up to me, they're constantly complaining about the governance of this council, that we're paying more council tax and we're seeing cuts in services. So I think we need some input from the ordinary residents and from their point of view. And how is that going to be? How are we going to go about that? If you could explain that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Councillor Carr, and very valid, very useful question. Thank you. Yes, we will be consulting with the public. There are, sorry, it's weird doing this with the headphones, isn't it? There are resident surveys that can be undertaken, and that there is actually a national model that's been developed by Data Cymru. But we don't want to do it in just that way of issuing a survey to residents. Obviously, there's a role for all 55 elected members in terms of their link to their communities and sharing feedback. But we'll also be looking at our engagement library in terms of consultations that have taken place, so that we're taking a holistic view in terms of community feedback. For example, we're about to go out in the next couple of weeks with the public budget consultation, so that will form a key part of feedback, in addition to specific questions that we'll need to ask the public around their view of services and performance. So that will be part of the timeline.
Thank you, Fran. Nigel, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to propose a amendment to recommendation 2.2. Within the report that Matt and Fran have got here, the committee of the GAC is involved in the scoping of the document for the assessment. It's also specifically required to review the draft action plan that comes through in a later stage prior to it going to council. And I think it would be helpful if 2.2 was amended to incorporate that second stage work. I have a question for Matt in relation to the process and the governance process around the change to the GAC terms of reference, Matt. That I can see the clear benefit in adjusting and altering the terms of reference to pick up the required roles. And I can see the change needing to go into democratic services with Chris and stuff to review. Just in terms of a process, if you review the GAC terms of reference through democratic services, you then and have in the past reported into council, but it hasn't necessarily come back out to GAC formally. And I'm mindful of, for example, the change made to the terms of reference to the GAC March, April, May, which went through democratic services and then into full council, but it hasn't actually formally, as far as I can see, been processed through the GAC, and neither was the GAC informally consulted on the draft terms of reference. So I'm just wondering if there's an ability to tighten the governance process in here that would allow a circulation through GAC and democratic services in a way that effectively grounds the terms, as well as involving GAC on its input. So if I value a comment back from Matt on that. In pragmatic senses, I think the way forward with the WLGA is a sensible way forward. It doesn't strike me, Geronimo might have a view on this. There doesn't seem to be a huge difference between what the WLGA panel peer review process was going back a number of years against what has been proposed here. It was again a similar on-site intense 3-4 day period in production of a report subsequently. And I don't sense there's a huge difference in terms of the approach being suggested here. But I may be wrong, but I just sense that Ronway might have a view on that. But those would be my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel.
If I could just comment, yeah, it's very similar, as Nigel just pointed out, very intense process. At the end of the day, it all depends on what the outcomes are following that process. So yeah, it is a significant piece of work that needs, that needs our attention.
Okay, thank you. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. In terms of the report and the changes to the constitution, what's referenced in the report is actually where the function sits in terms of whether that's a cabinet function or a council function. So that's what the reference is to changes in the constitution, as opposed to changing to the governance and audit committee's terms of reference. But it is an important point to raise, because I will reflect on whether or not, or the extent to which, that might also be something that needs to be looked at. And I would propose that if it did, then that would be something that we would take to Governance and Audit Committee as part of that process.
Yeah, Chair, can I come back to Matt on that?
Yes, Nigel?
Yeah, Matt, the reason I raise that, if you go to the Local Government Measures 2011 original statute as amended by the 21 Act, it specifically vests in that legislation in the Governance and Audit Committee of the Council responsibility for performance or receipt of performance reports. And I think, as you say, there's a potential for confusion if councils have the ability to vest directly an alternative arrangement to that, i.e. with the executive. It would probably be helpful to try and tighten that in the terms of reference for the specific committees involved, Matt. That's what was behind my question.
Yeah, Chair. As I say, it's a good point to raise, and that's something that we'll reflect on and make sure that we report back as we need to on any amendments to the terms of reference. It was just a point of clarity from my perspective in terms of what's referenced in the report, and that's an additional point that Nigel's raised that we'll pick up.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Sally, can we make sure that's in the minutes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I actually had. I'm struggling knowing when to put these on and take them off. It's a bit of a nightmare. I think I've done quite well so far, actually. Just a very quick question, and it's with reference to the WLGA, and I think on page, I think it's page 222, there's talk about WLGA's offer is favoured at present. They already have a pool of trained experts and costs will be met in full by them. But then in the WLGA methodology paper, there's a statement right at the end about outline of costs where it talks about the WLGA will deliver on a full cost recovery basis. And it starts talking about estimated costs, etc. Do I misunderstand, or is there a sort of contradiction here?
Well spotted. It's just a change that's happened since the guidance was issued. So you're correct. Originally, each local authority was being advised that it was going to cost around £20,000 to £25,000 to undertake the panel assessment, and that we were to find that funds ourselves. But since then, there's been discussions, and it's being funded through WLGA, so that takes the financial pressure off each local authority. But obviously, that decision was made after they'd published the guidance.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, do we have any more questions or observations? If not, we have and we're now looking to confirm a slightly amended recommendation 2, where there are 2 recommendations: that we consider the proposals, that the responsibility for making detailed arrangements sits with the executive, and secondly, that the committee notes the role of governance audit committee in the scoping of the document and subsequent review of the action plan. Do I have a proposal? Thank you, Phil. And you seconding, Nigel? Yeah. And finally, show of hands, please. Yeah, I think it's unanimous again, Sally. So thank you very much. Are you okay with that now, Matt and Kerry? Yep. Thank you. Now, can I, as I mentioned earlier, with fairly long agenda, we're now at 12 noon or almost. Can I suggest that we have a 10-minute break? We make sure that we're, excuse me, back by 12:10 to make a fresh start. Thank you. Regulatory reports. Just about there. Thanks very much. Yep, ready. No one else on screen. Are they still? Hello, everyone. We're back. Hi, Nigel. So, yeah, 10-minute break. Now we can please move on to item 10A. This is over to you. You've got a long session now, Fran. 10A, corporate risks and issues log. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Okay, you'll be pleased to know that I don't intend to go through this in minute detail. I think all members of the committee are very familiar with the process now in terms of the corporate issue and corporate risk register. So issues being things that are of concern to us that are with us now, and risks things that haven't happened but we are monitoring closely given a level of concern. The main thing that Yola was going to ask of you today was, as well as obviously providing assurance in terms of the progress made against our risks and issues, was to actually to seek the committee's views. That's not necessarily this afternoon. It's something that you probably want time to reflect upon. But in the new year, there is going to be a thorough review of our risk management framework. And as a key committee involved in looking at the risk management framework, your feedback and any ideas in terms of the management of the process is welcomed. So just to get that point across. In terms of the actual reports, Governance and Audit Committee are asked to consider the contents of the corporate issue and risk register, and particularly to look at the changes that have been made following review and make any observations to Cabinet. This report will be going to Cabinet tomorrow. The key changes are listed on page 254 of the report. So in terms of the corporate issue register, that is proposed to transfer the issue to service level. So that's not to say that that there aren't issues, but they can be managed at a service level. And there's also key changes in terms of the risk register, which are noted under paragraph 3.9. And again, I won't go through them in detail. I'll work on the assumption that they're pretty self-explanatory and that members of the committee have read the report. So on that basis, Chair, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fran. I'm not sure if there are any questions or observations. I have one question, Fran, if you don't mind, and it's with regard to environmental enforcement, and that's to some extent because well, I'm a dog owner of several dogs, and I read from time to time people's complaints about their impact on the the environment or the pavements. But in the detail on corporate issue number 11, it talks about Cabinet decided to retain this as a corporate issue. But in the changes that are being proposed, it said that this item is to be moved to set the service issues register as impacts have not materialised. Is that just an inconsistency, or has something changed since the report was produced?
As I understand it, Chair, that was a previous decision by Cabinet, and obviously this report will go back to Cabinet tomorrow. But the proposal is that given the anticipated impacts haven't materialised, so that was about a concern that there would be an increase in complaints and a negative impact on the environment, and that impact hasn't materialised, which is why it's proposed to not remove it, just move it to be monitored at a service level. But obviously that will be one of the proposals that will go to Cabinet again tomorrow.
Okay, I'm clear that the detail relates more to what the past situation was. Okay, thank you very much for that. Nigel, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I will send some comments to Yolo outside of the meeting, and having worked with him before on a similar document elsewhere. The worry I have about this document is it's fallen into never mind the quality, feel the width. And there are some key elements of change that I would be promoting here. Now, the first is to separate clearly into two documents, the corporate issues items from the corporate risk register. I think if you can meaningfully focus in summary information on those two separate issues without combining them in a single report, I think it would help with clarity and understanding of those matters. I think in presentational terms to committee, a report consisting of several hundreds of pages is not ideal. And if we can look, as we have done in other reports, maybe hyperlinking to key documents or supporting information in relation to a document of this nature, I think that would be preferable. Because it's very easy to get lost. I'm not certain how many members of committee will actually have read the entirety of these documents, being honest about it. And it's also confusing when you're trying to separate out where the key summary information is in relation to issues or where the key summary information is in relation to risk. For example, I couldn't tell exactly what the difference was between what pages 256 were and page 345 was, as an example. As both of them talk about issues summary and seem to me to be saying exactly the same thing, if not exactly the same page, repeated. Some specific change that I would feed back are in relation to the need to ensure a red, amber, green approach is consistent in the document when looking at color changes. I'm thinking particularly around pages 379 and 380. And the ability to use arrows as direction of travel, which I think are great and should be supported, we need to be consistent within the document as well. I'm not certain that we are. So in summary, much shorter document, more clearly focused, and an ability to highlight the issues at a summary level very clearly towards the top of both separate documents would be useful. And I'll send Yola some of those comments outside the meeting, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Can I just observe that I always have a little bit of a worry if we start putting a lot of detail at the end of hyperlinks and things, because it can become just that bit easier not to look at the detail for whatever reason. Personally, I'm always a great believer in having that detail readily available, but I do acknowledge your point that voluminous reports can be pretty off-putting, and of course the pack for today's meetings, including the risks and issues, stretched to almost 500 pages, which is fairly daunting if you're only receiving that perhaps 4 working days before the meeting. So we do need to sort of strike a balance, but I think to enable us to fulfill the GAC's role around risks and issues, we have to find a way where the detail is accessible, but perhaps not all appearing in one large envelope on a Tuesday or a Wednesday before the meeting, or electronically. So I'm happy to work with you on that as well. I know that some of the points that you've made, you have made quite earnestly in the past, and I imagine you're not over enamored with the progress that we've made, but I'm assured that YOLO has the very best intentions to turn this around and give us something which is more workable and manageable, and we can still take an assured view around risks and issues. Any more comments or questions? No? Okay, so the recommendation is that the Governance and Audit Committee consider the content of the corporate issue and risk registers and the changes that have been made, and that we make any observations for Cabinet. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, David. And a seconder? Thank you, Phil. And finally, a show of hands. I think it's unanimous. It's an increasingly reducing number. And thank you for those comments, Nigel. Oh, Nigel, do you have a question, or are you just, is the hand just up there saying, yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Fran. And now we're moving on to item 10B, which is external regulatory reports. This is where we get into the area where we're getting a little bit confused as to why we've got two, but I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, so yeah, I was listening online earlier, a bit of the debate in terms of external regulatory reports. So just to remind members in terms of the process, so when we have a final published audit report, which I should add is available on the relevant external regulatory websites, that audit report now goes to the relevant scrutiny committee in order for that to be robustly scrutinised before the audit reports are brought to governance and audit, in order that you are given assurance with the governance process and that appropriate scrutiny has taken place, and that as an authority we are working to implement the recommendations through the action plan that Conwy puts together. And then in terms of the progress, and we'll come on to this in terms of the next agenda item, Governance and Audit Committee then have a role in terms of every 6 months receiving an update as to how the authority is progressing with their action plans. So you are heavily involved. Clearly, there has been a change in terms of scrutiny, quite appropriately doing that scrutiny function. But we do advise in terms of the members' bulletin how any member of the public even can access those reports via the website of the relevant external regulatory body. So I hope that provides some clarification. In terms of the reports before you today, there are a couple. I'll just scroll down to page 435. So the first is His Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation, and this is a partnership arrangement between Conwy and Denbighshire and other public sector bodies in terms of our youth justice provision. Sorry, I'm just making sure officers join us online. His Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation undertook a joint inspection, and the conclusions are listed on page 438 of the report. I think it's fair to say, and it's referenced within the pack, that there has been robust scrutiny of the report through the Social Care and Health Scrutiny Committee that took place in July, and the minutes of those meetings are publicly available. Whilst there was obviously within the report some really positive comments in terms of the inspectors found a strong and knowledgeable youth justice leadership team, and acknowledged that the team had gone through quite a difficult period of change, and commended them for the work that they'd done there. It was found that the strategic leadership and governance of the service required considerable development. So an action plan has been put together. As I said, there's been scrutiny taken place back in July, and there's also been an opportunity for members to raise questions. Another committee meeting where senior leaders from Betsy Cadwallader, who are a key partner within the Youth Justice Service, were also available for questions. So that's the first report. The second report that is before you today is the Recycling and Waste Management reports. This was another local report. This was asking a specific question: does the council understand the reasons for its recycling performance and have robust plans to meet the recycling targets? Really positive report, concluding that overall the council is delivering an effective and efficient waste service. Again, this went to scrutiny, so it went to Economy Place scrutiny on the 20th of November, so just last week, where it was robustly scrutinised. There was one action raised from that committee, just requesting some more information in terms of fly tipping, and that will be actioned through discussion with regulatory services who have responsibility there. So an update on that, given the tight timescale, that wasn't available for today. So they are the two reports tabled today for governance and audits. And just going back to the recommendations, it's that you acknowledge receipt of the final reports, that you support the governance process in terms of reviewing the action plans, and that you are satisfied with future monitoring arrangements. So obviously they will come back to you in 6 months in terms of progress being made to implement those recommendations. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Fran. Does anyone have any questions or observations? I think personally, when I read the reports, found it was almost like one extreme to the other in terms of what one has clearly set out a requirement to do quite a bit of work. That's the YGS, whereas on waste management, Conwy is very well progressed. But I think the only thing I would say about the recycling and waste management report was that when I read it, I thought, why is it coming across as, in a way, quite negative? Because we're one of the country's leaders, and yet we're still getting these. I'm not saying we shouldn't undertake the actions, and I've seen what actions are to be taken. But it just seems to be painted in it has a slightly more negative tinge to it than I would have expected on that one. And I think certainly personally, and I would imagine as a committee, we're very supportive of all the work that is going to have to be undertaken on YGS, and that's a very large piece of work, and we will be very interested in seeing how that progresses. But yes. Sorry. I've said enough. Nigel, you have a question?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, just a bit of feedback and a question. Feedback on here is that, apropos the last discussion, the use of a hyperlink on this report, I think, works well, and you get a more summarised and focused report. My question on here, possibly for Fran, is where you've got a joint review involves Denbighshire as well as Conwy. One, is a lead authority always identified? And two, it might be helpful to have a reference on the cover report to where that other authority has got to in relation to the recommendations that have come through on the report. Presumably, it's a shared action plan, but it's not clear from looking at the document whether and how that links across. It may be a presentation issue, but I value sort of some comment back on that, if possible, please. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. We are the lead authority, so Conwy is the host authority for the partnership, but obviously you're correct that it is a joint action plan. So it's not that Conwy's got an action plan and Denbighshire's got an action plan and Betsy's got an action plan. It's an overall action plan which has different actions assigned to the relevant organisation that needs to make improvement. I can see that Anist is on the screen, and I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, Anist.
Apologies, I've just joined. I missed the first bit of the comments. Apologies.
It was just asking Anist in terms of the approach to the action plan and who's the lead authority. So Conwy is the lead host for the YGS, but in terms of the action plan, we have a single action plan, don't we, that every organisation contributes towards collectively.
Yes. In terms of context, so the Youth Justice Service was established under the Crime Disorder Act, which placed a duty on local authorities to establish a multi-agency, multidisciplinary team. So as such, it's governed by a management board. So this action plan is the management board action plan, so it's a joint one. So a decision was made back in 2000 with the establishment of YGS that Conwy would lead as the lead agent, lead local authority. So in essence, just to simplify, it's a one action plan because it's the management board and that multi-agency partnership who manages all the actions within the action plan.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Jenny, you have your hand up.
Oh, Prynhawn, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And thanks for your patience. We've got such a treble booked morning. So Anest is covering the Safeguarding Board and you can see on screen, so Rhyn, Cynghorydd Cathy and myself have been opening our fostering inspection today. So it's a very full day, otherwise we'd have been there. I think the second part of the question, if I'm not mistaken, was about where Denbighshire Local Authority are up to with accepting the recommendations. Yeah, as helpfully, Nigel, you were at the Audit and Governance in Denbighshire, and they have sort of discharged the responsibilities to lead on the action plan to Conwy. However, I'm not sure if this was shared earlier. We have agreed an informal joint scrutiny across both councils and wider partners. I think we're just trying to finalise a date for that. I'm not sure if we finalised, but I think we're trying to get it at around the anniversary of the actual inspection, which would be February time, if that helps.
Nigel, are you okay with that?
Yeah, Chair, it's the precedence not only on this case, but is on others where joint bodies are involved. It's trying to add clarity to how best they are presented, the need not to duplicate work or reinvent a wheel in one authority if a shared and common report can be shared, and that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing in relation to actions being taken. And each authority will have their own specific remits or ways of doing things. But I think ideally from here, well, that's what we should be saying in order to support officers in rationalising the amount of time, resource and energy that's required in dealing with similar reports. So that's where I was going on the try and keep it simple, be clear about leadership, and be clear about the need for a common and shared report and action plan, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Absolutely key that responsibilities and accountability are very clear. Any more questions or comments for Fran, Jenny? Honest? No? Okay, so the recommendations are that the Governance Audit Committee acknowledge the final reports, the recommendations and the action plans. I think the actions were clear. That we as a committee support the governance process to review these action plans, which I think we have actually done in the past, but we can repeat our support of that, and that the GAC are satisfied with the future monitoring arrangements in place, as explained in 3.5 of the presentation package. So do I have a proposer for this? Thank you, Councillor Stephen. And seconder, David, thank you. And finally, a show of hands in support of those recommendations. Yeah, it's now unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jenny and Anest. You can get back to your busy day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And now we're moving on to item 10C, which is the progress that's being made on recommendations that have been raised on earlier external reports, of which there are several. So again, over to you, Fran.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Last but by no means least, the next stage of any external audit reports is obviously that once officers have had time to implement the recommendations and update their action plans, we bring that back to Governance and Audit Committee. So what we're seeking today is that you approve the progress that's been made on the extensive number of recommendations put before you, and also confirm that the actions identified for removal from future compliance reports that you're happy with that. So it's your role really to be satisfied as to the adequacy of the internal control, and that where there has been progress, that you're happy with it, and provide you with assurance that where there is little progress being made or a lack of clarity, those action plans are scrutinised in great detail through our improvement and audit group, and if needed, any action that's not progressing can be escalated to strategic leadership team. Where appropriate and where things become business as usual, recommendations can be moved across to service plans or service risk registers, or if appropriate, the corporate risk register. So the actual report starts on page 448 of the pack and goes on for quite a considerable length of pages. So I don't propose to go through this in detail. I'll work on the assumption that members have had the opportunity to look over it, and if there are any particular actions or any queries in terms of those actions which have been recommended for removal, then I'll happily attempt to answer questions. I might not be quite as genned up on this report as Yola would be, but I'll give it a go. So I'll hand back to you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Fran. Yeah, I have 2 or 3 remarks to make on this, but before I do, does anyone, David, just going to invite other questions and comments.
Page 451. There's quite a few of these confirm removal of recommendation. I think in this particular case they couldn't progress it because of outside problems with the DWP, but where they do remove a recommendation, how do we feed back to the author of the report that we've removed a recommendation? I know we agree to remove it, but is there any feedback to the author then as well? Or do they follow it up themselves?
In terms of the officer, then yes, we'll let them know that Governance and Audit have agreed, because it's their proposal to remove the recommendation.
Yeah.
There is, of course, the opportunity should, or this is the ones you're referring to in terms of leisure, there is the opportunity, should they so wish, that Audit Wales, as the author of the report, could choose to do some follow-up work if they wanted to. But Audit Wales do follow this committee, so they will be aware through the committee whether recommendations have been approved or not.
Okay, thank you, Fran. Thank you, David. No other. Can I go through my 2 or 3? And Fran, you'll remember from. Oh, sorry. Before I start, Nigel, do.
Sorry, Chair. I just had one question, Chair.
Sorry.
Chair, I had one question on page 463, the FN 01011. Recognising, Fran, you might not have a full answer here, but there's a red due date outstanding audit recommendation about North Wales councils and Betsy Cadwallader. What is going on there? It talks about delay by legal issues and challenges under the progress comments. Do you have the background to that?
I don't, I'm afraid.
Okay. It might be helpful if we could have, whether it's Yola or another circulating officer update on that, Chair, for our information outside of the meeting, please.
Okay, we will minute that, Nigel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, as I was saying, Brian, you probably remember from a year or two back, and you're smiling knowingly, but I'm not going to say anything about dates. But what I am wanting to suggest, and I have no particular issue with 3.8 on 441, which is this: many of the responses to recommendations have been included where appropriate within service plans, service risk registers, and if appropriate, the corporate risk register. And so in seeking to avoid duplication, it's recommended for the report or individual recommendations to be signed off. I think if, just a suggestion at this point, but if where we are facing a recommendation to sign off something, it would be helpful, without having to interpret all the wording, to know whether in fact the recommendation to close a particular item is because it's going to a service risk register or etc., etc. And it's not entirely clear on these pages of report. A small point.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take a note of that.
I just want to pick up the point that you made about sort of the numerous pages. Personally, I don't have a problem with the numerous pages, because if we are going to fulfill our role of reviewing progress against actions arising from external reports, we need this information and we need this detail to best understand. So that, and I don't, hopefully I will not get any objection even from Nigel on the volume of paper in that regard, on that one. If I just briefly take you to page 447, and it's the report on the provision of local government services to rural communities, where there's a recommendation that local authorities produce a community asset transfer policy, etc., etc. And the progress comments were that the community asset transfer policy will not be produced. However, there will be an asset management plan which will include a reference to community asset transfer and lean on new Welsh Government guidance. To put it not too finely, is that just a sort of cop-out? Is there a...
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a couple of things here. That the recommendations, if we chose, we could decline, but that's not what's being suggested here. So we're trying to streamline the number of policies that we have. So what the officer is proposing here is that there is a requirement to have an asset management plan. So rather than having a separate community asset transfer policy, which was the recommendation, it will be incorporated, that's not even a word, incorporated into the asset management plan as a section within there.
So it won't just be a reference, there will be a section, and
that's my understanding. Yeah, there'll be a section.
Okay, thank you. Just another observation on it's on the following page, actually, 448, and it's the examination of leisure services. So the update talks about, due to capacity issues, this recommendation has been put on pause. And then on further reflection, we're not going to implement. Now that may well be fine, but I don't know what was taken into account in this further reflection. Was it simply the case that we didn't see any end point on this capacity issue and it simply was not going to be possible, or was there some other reason? And that may be too detailed for you to respond now to. But
Yeah, I don't know the specific detail, but it goes back to my earlier point that owing to capacity, owing to financial situation, and particularly in relation to the work that Leisure are doing at the moment, their focus is on sustainability. So it's not to say that we're not continuing with looking at the health benefits in terms of leisure. It's just that the capacity to do this particular piece of work, in terms of social return, there isn't the capacity to do so. When I was just preparing for today, I did make a note here, just to give the committee assurance that obviously, whilst it doesn't narrow down to the specifics of what's going on within Conwy, there is extensive work that's undertaken in terms of public Health Wales, and in fact they've given an update in terms of health outcomes in 2024. So whilst we might not have the capacity to do this particular recommendation on the NARES programme, we can draw on data that's wider in terms of what's the current health situation and health outcomes for Wales or North Wales, or even Conwy, depends on the statistics that Public Health Wales are able to provide us with.
okay, thank you. Because had I seen that in that sort of explanation in there, then I probably wouldn't even have raised it, because I do know I've read other documents where clearly there has been some focus on the longer term benefits of leisure centres and fitness, etc. So it just comes across as very blunt and, well, we've thought about it a bit more and we're not going to do it. Whereas there's more substance behind it than that.
Yeah, and obviously
positive substance.
I can't speak for the officer. They'd be able to respond in a lot more detail. And yes, it does appear blunt, but that is the reality of capacity within the authority at the moment. That the key focus for leisure services is on the sustainability of the service. And I think, without making a sweeping statement, it's a known fact, isn't it, as to the impact of exercise on our health and on our well-being. But I just wanted to give that assurance that we can draw data. It's publicly available. I can circulate the link if members would like it, in terms of the Public Health Wales outcomes that were, an update was published this year.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think I would certainly be interested in seeing if the link's available. Yeah. Thank you. And so I'm satisfied with those comments and expansion. So I'm not going to resist removal of the recommendations so far. But I just have one final question, and it's sort of another angle to David's point about the item that refers to the DWP. And that's on page, well, among others, page 451. And there is a remark here: we are encountering, and I think it's made on two actions. We are encountering management difficulties with DWP and have progressed this recommendation as far as reasonably possible. We therefore recommend sign-off, which I don't know personally what the difficulties are, how much progress has been made, and you know, are we just giving up? That's how it reads.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I can't believe that.
We're definitely not giving up in terms of encouraging members of the public to exercise and to make sure that the services that we offer, not just through leisure, but you know, the great outdoors, isn't it? In terms of our officers working on rights of way and our parks, that kind of thing, that we're doing our utmost to make sure that members of the public have as much opportunity to exercise in whichever way they choose fit. I think I would want to refer this to the officer if you wanted more detail, because I'm not that close to it. But the actual recommendation was that the council and its partners look at ways in which it can engage more effectively with those not currently using leisure services. And the update does provide that there was a socioeconomic review questionnaire that was completed as part of the pricing strategy review. So it's not that work hasn't gone on. There has been extensive work in making sure that there is value for money and that we are affordable for people to become members of Fit Conwy. But I guess in terms of the details of discussions with DWP, I'm not privy to that in terms of what the issues were. So I'd have to refer that back to the officer.
Okay, I'm a bit hesitant to say that we should not close these you know, this particular one, which is 0503 on page 451, just because of the references to DWP, because I do know that there are other things going on that support the actions, but it's just the very blunt way in which this is noted. Obviously, I think as a GAC, we need to know that there have been difficulties working with the DWP, but to have a clearer understanding of what those were, and that it's the fact that we're not going to be doing anything else is not really going to impact negatively on the good work that's been going on, then that's fine.
I'll take that back and get a further update for you. As I said, I wouldn't know the ins and outs of what discussions took place.
So that's all. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just to expand on Ian's point in relation to that, it makes reference to DWP. Now, many people who use the DWP are on low incomes or have a disability. How does that conflict with the council's equalities policy? Because if we're not providing that kind of value for money for people who are on disabilities, then in my opinion, that would conflict with the Equalities Act.
Yeah, any changes to fees or charges have to have an equality impact assessment, Councillor Stephen. But also to give you assurance, we also have a dedicated member of staff within our leisure team that focuses on disability, and actually as part of Inclusive National Inclusion Week, he launched initiatives around exercising and accessibility for disabled people. So there are controls in terms of assessing the impact, and as part of our equality impact assessment, there is a section that specifically looks at the socio-economic duty and any impact that may have.
Okay, just to come back a little bit, it mentions that there have been consultations with the previous Westminster government going back to 2023. have there been any further discussions with the new government since they've been in office in July? And would any further consultations with the new government have any potential impact on that recommendation to drop it?
You've got me there. No idea. I'd have to speak to the officer, I'm afraid.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, so the recommendations are that we approve the progress that has been made on the recommendations included within external audit reports, and that we as a committee confirm the actions identified for removal from future compliance reports. Do I have a proposer, please? Thank you, David. And
sorry, I was going to make an amendment that with reference to that DWP recommendation that we dropped, that one remain.
Sorry, is there a seconder for the amendment proposed by Councillor Stephen? Okay.
so that just to clarify, that means that two of the actions, remember it's two of the actions that were noted for removal, we as a committee do not support their removal. Was that correct? So that is on page 450, involvement opportunity. And on page 451, which is confirming removal of recommendation. An internal audit, I gather, have been consulted as well on how you manage access membership.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just intervene? Can I just ask Councillor Stephen which particular recommendations you are asking to be omitted, just so that we can be clear? Thank you.
Yeah, the only one I'm asking to be omitted is FN 0502.
Thank you. Can I just confirm, Councillor David, David, that you are happy with that as well?
Can I ask why only 02 and not 03? Because they both refer to management difficulties with DWP. One is around the use of data analytics, and the other is around the socio-economic review questionnaire and access membership.
Chair, it's because the FN. Sorry, where am I again? Yeah, I know 05. It directly impacts members of the second one. You've made that doesn't directly.
FN 0502.
Yes.
But surely 03 does as well, because we're talking about undertaking a review of data to establish if we can identify who isn't using our leisure facilities.
Okay, I think the important thing here is that I've asked for an amendment. Whether you accept that amendment is the issue here.
Well, I think it's you have proposed that it's been seconded by David, and we'll take a vote on that. In which case, these two, the one action, which is FN 0502, we do not support its removal from the update report. O2
Yes.
or O3? O3 we're okay with. Sorry?
Is it just O2? I've written down O3 first of all. I do apologise if I've misconstrued that. So you're asking for the removal just of O2, is it, Councillor Stephen?
Just checking it again.
Just so we can make sure we've got
we
the
need to be
right
specific that
proposal that
there's-
you want to make.
And I'll amend it again, is to O2 and O3.
Just, okay. So that is so we need to take a separate vote on that. So Councillor Stephens proposed, Councillor David has seconded. Sorry, not Councillor David. David. Can we show a show of hands on with regard to the amended recommendation? So we are confirming the actions identified for removal from future compliance reports, except for FN 0502 and FN 0503. Yeah. Okay. Unanimous, Sally, I think.
Yeah.
And there is a separate recommendation, which is that we approve the progress that has been made included in the external audit action plans. Someone like David, thank you very much for proposing. Phil, thank you for seconding. And finally, a show of hands in support of progress. Thank you, everyone. That's unanimous. And thank you, Fran. So we've now come to the end of the meeting. So can I just thank you for your attendance and participation, useful comments and questions. And thank you for your resilience getting through a somewhat long agenda. So thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Chair. Thanks, everyone. Take care.